told his family of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him to, and how he had advanced him before the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, verse 12, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther has invited me to this banquet, and it's only going to be me and the king. And then verse 13, it said, yet all this avails me nothing as long as Mordecai, that Jew, does not bow down before me. Can you imagine that? One person affecting this old man's life, his thinking, everything. And his wife and his advisors, you know, just like the king's advisors, advised him in the wrong direction when it came to King Vashti. That's why you should be very careful who you listen to, because they could be advising you in the wrong direction. Same way with Haman's advisors now. They said, hey, you know, the time is coming very soon when we're going to be killing all the Jews. Why don't you erect a gallows? It was 75 feet high, and you can hang Mordecai higher than anybody else. And that sounded good to him, so that's what he had done. And then the events begin to change. You know, God is for us. Who can be against us? Doesn't matter who's against us, as long as God is for us. So that night, chapter 6, the king could not sleep. And he called the scribes and he says, read to me Chronicles. It usually puts me to sleep. Why don't you read Chronicles to me? He said, I'm having trouble sleeping. Read to me. So the guy's reading and reading and reading. And he comes down to the part about Mordecai uncovering the plot to kill the king, and how they discovered that it was true, and they put these guys to death. So the king says, well, what did we do to honor this guy? That's in verse 3. What did we do for this man? How did we honor him? And the scribe's looking. Well, there's no record. We didn't do nothing for this guy. He said, you mean a guy saved my life? And we didn't do anything for him? And at the same time he says, who's out in the outer court? And in God's providence, out in the outer court walked Haman. And you know, and I have to laugh at this part of the story because it's just so, although it's sad, but it's still very comical. Haman comes in and the scribe said, well, Haman is out there. He said, tell him to come in here. So he comes into the king's chambers, and the king asks him, you know, that's another thing about God. He's never caught off guard. You know, no matter what anybody will do or plot against us, God always has a plan. You know, he don't come up something that ain't presented to him and say, oh, wow, I didn't know they were going to do that. You know, God always has a plan. So Haman comes in, and the king asks him, what shall I do? And this is verse 6 of chapter 6. What shall I do for a man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman thought, well, who would the king more want to honor than me? You know, I'm Haman. I'm second in command. I'm going to the feast, the banquet tonight. So Haman is thinking, what would be the best way the king could honor me? So he says, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn. And this is verse 8. And a horse on which the king has ridden, and which is on, and put a royal crest upon his head, upon the horse's head. Then let the robe and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man. And then marching through the city on horseback, proclaiming, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And Haman is just thinking, boy, somebody's going to lead me around and just proclaim, you know, how great I am and how the king wants to honor me. And the king says, I like that plan. It's great. I want to see that done. Matter of fact, you do it and get Mordecai and put the robe on him. Just don't leave anything unsaid or undone that you said. So here is Haman, who hated this guy, and now he's got to take this guy, robe him, put him on the king's horse, and then lead him through the city, proclaiming, this is what happens to the man that God delights, or that the king delights to honor. And when that transpired, further down there it says that Haman, when he was all done with that, covered his head and went home. He didn't even want people to see him because everybody knew that he hated Mordecai. So now he goes home and he tells his family, this is what I had to do. They already knew it. So they for the first time, gave him sound advice. He said, you're going to surely fall at the hand of Mordecai. And that was true. That's what happened. Now, chapter 7. While they were yet speaking at Haman's house and telling him what's going to happen, the servants of the king came for him to bring him to the banquet. And when they get there, they dined, and then the king asked the queen, what is your request? Up to half of the kingdom. And in verse 4 of chapter 7, she said, we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. My people, myself, both male and female, we will, and children, were to be sold, and our properties, everything taken from us. She said, if we were just sold into slavery, I would not even bother you with this request, although it would greatly affect your kingdom. The Jewish nation was a very helpful nation. They were a prominent nation. They were helping the kingdom. They respected the laws. They followed what the king has said. And she said you couldn't even compensate if we were sold as slaves. You couldn't even make up. You know, it would be a great loss to you. And the king says, who would dare to do this to my queen, to the Jewish nation? And then she pointed at Haman. She said, it is that wicked enemy, Haman. And Haman was then naturally, didn't know what to do. He was beside himself. The king got up and he walked out momentarily, and Haman started pleading for his life because he knew in the king's eyes that he wasn't going to last very long. He started pleading for his life. He was so distraught that he fell over at that time when they ate. It was kind of it wasn't like we sit in the chair. They had like a couch type. He fell over that couch. When he did that, in comes the king, and he said, you would assault my wife? You would assault the queen in my very presence? And when he said that, the servants were there. They said, you know, he built a gallows out there for Mordecai. Mordecai, let me read what he said about